And we're back, and we've got a kick-ass team assembled again today. Keith Graves from Christian Warrior Training, Jeff MD, otherwise known as 007, former CIA operative, and our Mad Bomber, Mike Sterling. Welcome to the show again, guys. All right, so today's topic is what's been going on in Europe as far as the attacks on the food supply chain over there. But before we go to Jeff, Mike, do you want to do a conflicted question?
Yes.
Okay.
Quick, let me pull one out real quick here. You guys talk about something. Speak among yourselves.
We can do that. So, Jeff, you had some comments before we hit the record button on this. As far as food supply chains, bring us back up to speed on Sri Lanka.
I think if you want a look into the future, look at Sri Lanka. They had followed all the WF, IMF financial strictures on their economy. They were trying to be their golden child. Well, it collapsed their economy, of course. And in addition to not being able to get gas for cars, because tankers would pull up and say, we're not going to unload until you pay us in cash. But they were not able to import. And part of it was policy, part of it was they didn't have the money. And they went from being a food exporting country to a food importing country in 1 year because their agricultural sector, because without fertilizers, things don't grow very well. When you see the Germans saying we want to reduce fertilizer consumption by 50%, when you see the Dutch saying we're going to buy up and close down 5,000 farms to control nitrogen pollution in the water, that's what you're going to be getting. That's the future. You're going to have countries that were exporters of food are going to be importing food. But the big questions, where are they going to import it from if they all do this?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to have a recollection that nitrogen represents somewhere around 57% of our atmosphere.
That is true.
So,
but they're worried about it in the water.
Yeah, but cutting back on fertilizer, and therefore the cows have nothing to eat, and therefore the cows don't fart and cause global warming, as per AOC. From my perspective, this is just another WEF power play. That if they control the food, they control the people. And
absolutely.
I think in addition to Sri Lanka, what's going on in Europe right now is a great indicator of what they're going to try here next in America. Because as Keith so eloquently pointed out, it's much like what happens in Europe, then comes to California, then it comes to America. They test it out there first. So Mike, before we dive in any deeper, do you have a question for us?
Conflicted question of the day. It's not a very good one. Sorry, you put me under pressure. I don't work under pressure well.
Right.
The government has taken over and your country becomes a police state. All rebels or nonconformists are being hunted and killed. Because of this, you are hiding in the woods at night and you realize a military drone is patrolling the area. What do you do? See the drone? Doesn't matter. Drone sees you.
That's a really interesting question. So my stepson is serving at Fort Benning in the Army. He was supposed to be moved to Louisiana recently, and they stopped that. Yeah, they stopped that transfer
Lucky
because
him.
they promoted him, and
Lucky him.
He's actually training small squads on how to deal with drones. So 5-man teams in a wedge formation moving through the woods. All of a sudden, you're confronted by an enemy drone. What's the protocol? What do you do? And he's got 3 years left that'll put him at 8 years when it's all said and done. But he's got 3 years left, and he will be in that position for the next 3 years. I should be calling him, texting him on the side, asking him, what do you do?
Well, let's talk about that at the end of the show.
Absolutely.
I just want to know they're being hunted by who, because the cops aren't going to care anymore. They're all going to go home.
So, guys are with us, along with 3/4 of the military. So there you go. It's not a very realistic question. I don't know. Maybe
I'll go with the question though.
Maybe you're not in the U.S. Anyways, we'll talk about it later.
All right. So
moving on.
Yes, moving right along. So Mike, I know you've looked into this as well, as far as the WEF's plans to put us all in 15-minute cities and control our food, and we'll eat the bugs and get the monocle out. Okay, let her rip.
You will eat the bugs, and you will live in the pod, and you will own nothing. Oh, damn it, I lost my eye. And you will You will have right. That happens to you all the time. I can't even now. You kill me. Anyway,
That's cold, man. That
you'll
is
live in a
cold.
you'll live in a
Oh,
pod and you'll own nothing, and you will be happy. And I will go now to Davos and speak to the other smart people in the world.
What?
There we go.
You
Yeah.
missed the bugs.
No, I said the bugs. You will
You got
eat the
it.
bugs. That was the very first thing I said.
Okay, I missed the bugs. So
Yeah. Look, I'm the deaf guy here. Don't make me go to my union rep. That's my job.
So that's my Captain America prosthetic eye, by the way. And whatever's in the middle of it catches light from every possible angle. And Cindy does not appreciate when I wear this. So
I don't appreciate you even talking about it.
Come on now.
It weirds me out, man. I don't know why.
It's all fun and games till somebody loses an eye.
I got friends that are triple amputees. That doesn't bug me. You talking about your eye? I don't know why, man. I don't. Look at me. Look at me.
Just for that, when you're here on February the 17th to do the big shooting event at Volusia Top Gun, I'm going to wear it that day just for you.
I'm telling you.
All right, back on track.
Back to what we were talking about. Historical precedent on this sort of thing. Any time in history when anyone has tried to collectivize agriculture, anytime it turns into a famine, millions of people starve. So a great example is the Holodomor famine in the 1930s. 3.9 million people starved to death when the Soviets attempted to collectivize agriculture. And at that point, the collectivization in Russia had already failed, right? People were starving. So what did they do? They moved over to Ukraine and they seized all the land in the Ukraine in the greater Soviet ethic. Now, brothers, you're going to provide all the food for everyone in Russia, but we're not going to leave you enough food to survive. 3.9 million people die in less than a decade, and we're talking an area about the size of Texas was providing all that, all the kulaks, all right? And this happens every single time. It happened in Cambodia under Pol Pot. It happened under, you've got a bunch of people that know nothing about farming, trying to do the farming, right? They're just trying to survive. It happened under the Soviets. It happened under the communist Chinese. Yep. It happened in Africa every time. What was the one in South America that it did?
Well, I know in Africa, it happened in Zimbabwe.
Right, it definitely happened in Zimbabwe, but there was one in South America that happened. Anyway, every time worldwide this happens. So you've got a small amount of people who want to start taking control of all of this thing, right? Now, that may be part of the design. With these World Economic Forum nut bars, that may be the plan.
Well, I would argue that is the plan, because as they work towards their 2030 agenda, part of that is depopulation of the earth. So it makes perfect sense that the damage that they're attempting to do to the food supply chain is not only to make people dependent on them for food, but also to in pursuit of their goal of reduced population. Why do they want reduced population? Well, they claim it's for global warming, climate change, but in reality, it's to have a smaller group of minions for them to keep under their heel, and it's easier to manage. I've seen some stories come out of the WEF where they feel that the best number is 1 billion, no more than 1 billion people. So you're going to kill off 7-8 billion people. And why? Because that 1 billion can do everything that the elite need to be done. And it's easier to manage and bully 1 billion people than it is to 8 or 9 billion people.
Well, come on. All animals are created equal.
This episode of SDN is brought to you by Switch It Up, your national grid down service provider. Get a quote on a solar PV system with battery backup at switchitupinc.com or click the link in the video description below.
Interesting point you're bringing up, about controlling people. So I've mentioned before, there's a couple of politicians that are on stage now that were actually my prosecutors, right? So Eric Swalwell, VP Harris, both I saw routinely, and seeing those people grow up from knowing who they were and then seeing them grow up through our political system, they are all about power. And seeing them, when we talk about power, political positions, corrupting people because of the power, it's insane. I think for a lot of these people, it's about power. I think you're right about decreasing population, but then also so that it's easier to control everybody, because I think they see what's coming. You see it through the video you just did on the paramilitary bill,
You
where
just did.
where they passed this paramilitary bill so you can't train. Literally, everybody watching this channel could not train with 2 more people. If otherwise, you'd be a paramilitary organization. They're freaking out because they know that we're rising up and we're getting angry and we're about to take control, and they're doing everything they can to stay in control.
Well, and the other thing about the food supply is, okay, if I'm not a big conspiracy theorist necessarily, but if you look at COVID was a way to reduce population. Okay, it didn't work that well. Killed a few million people, but when you have 7 billion, it's not that big a deal. Famine, there is no vaccine for being hungry. And the other thing about a famine is they can defer fault. It's not our fault. We didn't make the crops fail. It must be the farmer's fault, or it's this disease, or it's this fungus. It's an act of God. Nature did this. It's not our fault. It's not like we're lining up 7 billion people and shooting them. And speaking of the kulak thing in Ukraine, if you want to see a good movie depicting what went on, there's a movie called Mr. Jones, and it's about a reporter who goes down there to report on it. And there's a character in there. It's based on Walter Duranty, who was a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winner, who was covering it all up for Stalin. He was completely in bed with Stalin, but it's a great movie.
Duly noted. I'll have to check that out. So as far as the WEF is concerned, now that we're on the topic of the WEF and we're on the topic of controlling people, have you guys seen the speech that Klaus Schwab did where he said that we're getting close to the point where we don't even need to have elections because the artificial intelligence will be able to predict it anyway? So just stay home. Don't worry about voting. We know what the majority is going to vote for. So we're just going to proceed elections with no votes.
Pre-elections.
Yes. Yeah.
Do not trouble your little head with these problems. Work harder. For the proletariat needs you.
You got to have the monocle to sell that.
Okay? You're right. I do, but I'm not gonna do it. But
so anyway, essentially where we are with this food thing, just getting back on track, is that the globalists, especially the WEF, are the driving force behind this. The WEF have their minions in every Western government now, and they're using them as the mechanism, essentially put farmers out of business by legislating them out of business. And fortunately, in multiple countries like Germany and France, farmers have been standing up. Spain just happened as well.
Low countries, yeah. Romania,
Netherlands.
So there was some movement yesterday in Germany on the part of their government where they backed off some of the planned taxes and restrictions on things like fertilizer, diesel fuel, so on and forth. So at this year's WEF event in Davos, Switzerland last month, excuse me, Klaus Schwab actually said we're at risk of globalism failing because so many people are pissed off. They coined this term for the annual WEF meeting on rebuilding trust and how they were going to rebuild trust with us common people so that they could keep their globalist wet dreams alive. The problem is that the cat's out of the bag now, and too many of us are aware of what they're. Which, by the way, who elected Klaus Schwab? Exactly. So what gives him the right to tell the rest of the world what to do? Who elected Bill Gates? Who elected John Kerry? Like, we can just keep going on down the list. These are evil people with evil intentions, and they want to create all these changes in not just our country, but the world, but not be subject to them themselves. So they will have fine dining and the rest of us will eat bugs. And there's bug plants already popping up. There's one in Canada that's something like 100,000 square feet somewhere in Ontario that is getting ready to produce a whole bunch of food products based on growing and harvesting bugs.
But they won't eat it, guarantee you.
Exactly. That's my point. So
I have eaten several bugs, but only because I was really, really hungry.
You didn't have a choice.
Yeah. At the end of the day, here's the rhetorical question. Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Because there are multiple movies that portray things like this. The Hunger Games would be one of them. Crappy movie, not something I'm particularly interested in, but it mirrors very closely what the WEF is attempting to do. You don't get to vote. You don't get any of the luxuries of life. You're basically live a life of hard labor. And you get to eat the bugs. Simple as that. We haven't seen anything.
Because you're a kulak.
Right. We haven't seen anything yet in America that I'm aware of that mirrors what's happening in Europe, but we know that that's a precursor to what happens here.
Oh, It
Have
can
you
happen
guys seen
really
anything?
quick. It can happen really quick here. Americans overall are fed up with what's going on. Something like that happening here, easy peasy, man.
Well, you look at the truckers who went down to the border to say secure the border, but some of the regulations that they've tried here in various times in the East, especially, the Carolinas and stuff, they did all these really strict things about, because the hog farmers would collect the manure and then they'd spread it on the fields to grow the corn to feed the hogs. And basically what farmers have been doing since there were farmers. You have manure spreaders for a reason.
Mhm.
But then they said, well, there's so many unintended effects from that. Oh, there's algae in this ditch that's above whatever the EPA says is okay. So they say you can't do that anymore. So then they're like, okay, what do I do with 150 tons of pig manure? And you can't
to my place.
But you can't landfill it. Oh, that's toxic. So what they're trying to do is, by these regulations, force these large industrial scale efficient hog farms to either scale back or go out of business. They do the same thing with chickens as well.
Or you look at what California did with the Central Valley. The Central Valley in California was the breadbasket of the western part of the United States. Pretty much everything west of the Mississippi was fed out of that valley. It was incredibly fertile, and building soil is not something that happens overnight. That's a decades piece of work. And Sacramento decided that because that valley was almost exclusively red politically, they decided to start playing games with water, and they started taxing the water, and then they started reducing the amount of water that they could have. And when I was a kid out there, you used to drive through the Central Valley, and it was just thousands and thousands and miles of orchards and beautiful fields, and there was tons of food coming out of there. I went back there a few years ago and was astounded. It was like driving through a ghost town. It literally looked like something out of the Grapes of Wrath. Miles after miles after miles of dead orchards in the middle of summer. And
I grew up out there like you, and it affected my friends. My friends' families have been generations of farming since the 1800s that don't have farms anymore.
All because
Gavin Newsom.
All because, well,
Sorry.
all those knuckleheads. All those.
You can censor my finger.
Yeah, they take the water for crops and use it to build swimming pools in Beverly Hills.
Or even more so. So how California, it's got water, but it doesn't have a mountain of water. They started growing rice at the same time in the right around in the district around Sacramento. The sheer volume of fresh water that is required to grow rice is astounding.
So fun fact for all my homies out in Northern California, my great-great-grandfather founded Colusa County, was Secretary of State, Will S. Green, up in California, and was known for his water, like bringing water to the Central Valley. Family's been back in California for that long. Not one person is left. Everybody is gone. There's nobody left. And it's because of what we're talking about here, what they're doing. It's not just, it's everything political.
So, Mike, are you saying that the restrictions on water was the primary reason that farming in that part of California dried up?
Yeah, because that's the lowest common denominator that you can restrict somebody on. You could restrict them on fertilizer all you wanted to, and they were going to wind up getting it somewhere else, right? You could restrict seed imports, you could do all that kind of stuff. But if you restrict their water, that completely shuts them off, right? So now those areas are all filled with tenant farmers and stuff like that. All that land,
with big farms, they're all like massive mega farms.
All that belongs to big conglomerates, and virtually it's almost impossible to find a family farm out there. And that's what they did out there. That's the precursor that we all get to look forward to. They will regulate you out of existence.
Well, and then they target American farmers. Here in Arizona, again, we have agriculture, but it's all got to be irrigated. The Saudis bought a big farm out past Gilbert, and they have water rights, and they're pumping like crazy because what are they growing? Alfalfa
in Arizona,
almost as much water as rice, and they're shipping it all back to Saudi Arabia to feed goats and pigs for the Hajj. But they're going to pump Arizona dry, and then when there's no more water to pump, they go, oh well, and they just walk away from it.
So you talk about foreign countries buying up land. Look at the Chinese are all over Idaho, buying up our mines, the gem state, right? So they're taking all of our minerals. But then you look at what the Chinese are doing with all the farms in Kansas, and they're buying up tons of farms in Kansas. Why are we allowing that?
Actually, I
Bill
think
Gates.
Kansas and Nebraska are in the process of booting them back out.
Well, can they do anything once they own the land? Can they
Yes.
take it away from them?
Yes, because the big problem is it's owned by a foreign entity who does not pay taxes.
Even though they're paying property taxes.
They're only paying property taxes at like
Yeah.
a bare minimum level. They're going for all the exemptions and everything like that. And it's not owned by
Okay.
citizens or anything like that. So the states have leverage in a situation like that, as far as I've been able to read.
Some of the states.
I think all of the states have it. It's just a question of whether or not they're willing to exert that leverage.
Well, and something else that's concerning, because I think the Chinese want to use the land, they want to grow food, and then they want to send it back to China. The ones that worry me, actually, as much or maybe even a little bit more than Chinese, are people like Bill Gates. He buys millions of acres of land, prime farmland, and then what if he just decides, I'm not going to plant anything?
Well, what about the companies that are making seeds that aren't annual, that won't keep regrowing?
Yeah.
You have to buy their seed every year, and now they're actually plants are disappearing because of what they're engineering,
or they're patented to where a farmer cannot keep seed from this crop to use to plant the next one. If he does, he gets sued because they have to sign contracts when they buy this seed that says they will not keep it, hold any back, and use it as seed for next year. It's all the GMO stuff. A lot of it's Monsanto, Cargill, all those, the big agribusiness guys.
Well, I think the other thing that I have not seen elsewhere, strictly in America, as far as I know, and don't quote me on these numbers, but for argument's sake, out of the lower 48, the federal government owns something like 10-12% of the land.
Yeah, it's land you don't want.
Right. But the Biden admin now is in the process of declaring certain areas ecological zones. And by declaring something an ecological zone, it means that you can't grow crops there. You have to let it, kind of like the stuff that caused the California wildfires. You just have to stop maintaining the land. You can't farm it. And this affects private landowners, number one. Number two, I saw Glenn Beck said that he has hundreds of acres and he's surrounded by a national forest. And his attorney's opinion was it's only a matter of time before they tell him he has to get all of his cattle off his land. He's become a rancher. He's not necessarily doing the work himself, but he does have cowboys on staff. And his attorneys told him to brace for it. It's coming, that they're going to say you're in an ecological zone because you're surrounded by this national forest and you can have animals.
It's already happening. My family has a cattle ranch in Eastern Oregon, and we're surrounded by national forests. It's the same thing. And we lease out our land to all the other ranchers for their cows, and they're already getting heat from the feds for everything. Just you name it.
Again, don't quote my numbers, but if the feds own somewhere around 10-12% of the land in the lower 48, the goal is to be somewhere around 35% of being zoned ecological, and therefore you cannot use it for agriculture, commercial, industrial, nothing, no development to speak of. So again, I don't know if that's happening overseas or not. What I do know that's happening overseas is they're specifically targeting the farmers with all these crazy taxes and regulations and reduction in access to things like fertilizer. And they're coming at the farmers from every possible angle. So another problem that I see happening in Europe that we're now seeing here is that Europe now has been flooded over the past 10 years with people from third world countries. So not only are they forcing farmers out of business, they've been importing tens of millions of people, all of whom need to be fed. So it's only compounding the issue there. And now we've been flooded, thanks to Obama and Biden, with many millions of people from third world countries who supposedly we needed to work the menial jobs that Americans don't want, but those jobs don't exist anymore because they've been automated now. Just like last month, the first McDonald's in the world that has 0 employees opened. There's not a single person in the entire building, but we need to import these people from the third world to do these jobs.
And I'll bet the soft serve ice cream machine still doesn't work.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, at what point are people just going to say, I've had enough? Now you see it in Europe. The farmers are saying I've had enough and they're fighting back. But America has been putting up with, I think, much more restrictions. And at what point are the farmers going to stand up and do what they're doing? And I can tell you right now, I'd love it. I'd support that 100%. I'll go out and support you with whatever you're going to do. You see people losing their minds over everything right now. And it's just wait till people get focused. When they get focused in leadership, not leadership, government leadership, but leadership of like regular people that stand up and say, hey, man, we've had enough.
So outside of the Ohio Valley is where the bulk of these large corporate farmers have bought out private families and individuals. So there's a higher concentration of private farmers in the Ohio Valley. So essentially call it catty corner from the Mississippi all the way up to the Ohio Valley. And I haven't heard a whole lot of people discuss this, but the train derailment in East Palestine polluted a shit ton of private farmland. And here's a tidbit that you can look up. The train that derailed and spilt all those chemicals, that entire business is owned by BlackRock. And BlackRock has been trying to buy out all of these farmers in the Ohio Valley for years. And I don't know what has driven their resistance to those buyouts, but those buyouts we know have happened outside of the Ohio Valley much more frequently. So if you want to talk conspiracy theories, was that train derailed on purpose to either poison that land or to motivate those private farms to sell out to the large corporate interests, especially in this particular case, BlackRock? So depending on how much of a tinfoil hat you want to put on, there are multiple things, you're right, that are happening here in America that aren't happening overseas as far as the attacks on farmers are concerned. There's probably more shadiness and sophisticated to the attacks that are happening here than there.
Is it really tinfoil hat time? Because what was conspiracy 5 years ago is true today.
Telling you, you got to check on your conspiracy theorist friends, because we ain't okay.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy, but I tell you what, man,
it's just feeling an awful lot like the news 6 weeks early.
It's tomorrow's news today.
Ooh, I like that. We might have to take that.
We might
Tomorrow's
have to do that.
News today.
Yeah.
That's really good.
You need to bring them on.
I had to write that down. So I actually have a t-shirt that says I identify as a conspiracy theorist, and my pronouns are "we were right." It's sitting on the top of my laundry pile right now.
You ain't wrong.
Maybe I'll wear that for the next episode of Survival Dispatch News. So anyway, just to kind of wrap this stuff up, essentially what's going on is we have a worldwide global coordinated attack on farmers, which in turn is predicated on reducing food supply, which is predicated on the globalists having more control over all of us, which goes one step further towards their Agenda 2030, where they're depopulating the earth and only keeping enough of us minions to satisfy the elite requirements for goods and services and food. Thankfully, we're starting to see some pretty good pushback in Europe. Germany and France in particular have been pushing back really hard. I love to see them spraying liquid manure. Like anybody who's born and raised in the country can tell you,
beautiful.
There's nothing more wretched than liquid pig manure.
It's horrible.
It is.
Oh man, and it was lots too. It was several tens of thousands of gallons.
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
They had it in high pressure sprayers spraying it all over, like ministries of agriculture and stuff. It was a hoot.
That's glorious.
They were dumping the big full size round hay bales in the middle of the roads. Yeah.
Stop teasing me. I'm just picturing that in DC right now, and it just makes me so happy.
So I have a friend of mine whose family settled their homestead, their ranch, in the late 1700s. And the area that he lives in is very fertile ground. Wine producers developed an interest in his part of the country maybe 20 years ago. So now there's all these wine producing companies or farms in their area. So these city slickers moved and bought the land next to Pat's ranch. And they went to the county and complained that the noise from the cattle, the noise from the hogs, the smell of manure was driving them nuts, and they wanted him to stop. This is a 500-acre farm, by the way, that's been in his family, like I say, for hundreds of years. Pat had heard through the grapevine that these nice city slickers who moved in next door, that they were throwing a huge wedding for their daughter on a warm summer day. So
sounds like a great plan to me.
Pat spent the entire day going up and down his property line spreading liquid hog manure.
You can be a good neighbor or you can be a bad neighbor. And how I'm going to act as a neighbor to you depends exclusively on how you treat me as a neighbor.
Well, I think there's probably countless stories of people moving from cities to rural areas and then trying to impose their will. Again, we're back to the people who can't leave other people alone and want those people to change to suit them.
But at the same time, you get that around military installations all the time. We used to get calls all the time. Hey, why are you shooting artillery? Well, for one, there's a whole bunch of artillery stationed here in Texas, and they need to practice at some point. That's why you don't have free healthcare. Get over it. Why is there airplanes flying over?
Oh,
Because that's what airplanes do.
We have F-35s and F-22s fly over daily. I still run outside and go up and look at it and love the noise, man.
Like a 6-year-old, yeah.
Oh, I love it. And it's so funny. I look out, there's all my other neighbors. Hey, what's up, man? We're all looking at the same thing that comes by every day, 10 a.m.
They're like a bunch of 6-year-old boys, man. I'm telling you.
They'll be back at 2. We'll be back out there looking again.
We get all the California people moving to Arizona, and they move in the middle of the desert.
Whoa, easy with the California people.
No, I'm not going to go easy on the California people, because if they vote like California people,
whoa,
not all of them do. We've got some that are escapees, but we have so many that'll come out here, buy it, but move out in the middle of the desert, and then complain about the deer, the javelina, the coyotes, the bobcats, the mountain lions, and my response to all of them is they were here first.
So let me throw out my California theory as a ex-California political refugee. See, we had great weather and great money and great funds. Hold on.
Did you get a prepaid visa with $10,000 on it?
No, I did not.
No,
I can't. Look at the color of my skin. Of course not.
Yeah, we were the bad refugees. Okay, we were the ones that escaped from behind enemy lines.
Those white supremacist refugees, right?
Hear me out.
No, you did move to Idaho.
My bad.
We had great weather, great wages, life was good, and all people from all the other states sent their trash to us. And then they ruined the state, and now they're just coming back to you. Stop complaining. You're getting what you sent to us a long time ago.
He ain't lying.
We didn't send you squat, man.
He's not lying. He's really not.
Dude, remember being a kid, being raised, and you're like, and all of a sudden, like, we're talking like in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden when
Reagan
graduate and you have to move 2 hours away because you can't afford to live in your own city. Same thing happened to you guys now. Yeah. Everybody sent their trash to us. I remember as a cop arresting people all the time. Where are you from? Indiana, Texas, Idaho, right? Oklahoma. They were from, nobody was, and I started asking the question, where are you from originally? Oh no, man, I moved here for the weather and the wages.
You got to realize though, in California, first rule of economics, anything you subsidize, you get more of. You subsidize bums, homeless people, and drug addicts.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Bums, homeless people, and drug addicts. They moved to California because California said, move here, we'll pay you to breathe.
Yep.
Sounds like a deal.
No. Hey, we'll pay you not to shoot each other. That's my favorite. We'll give you $1,000 a month if you don't shoot anybody.
Yeah.
Seriously, I'm not kidding. Vallejo and Stockton.
Yeah.
And I think San Francisco is going to do it now too.
I have a vague recollection of that. If you don't commit any criminal acts, you get to collect a paycheck.
Oh, no, it specifically includes shooting. And how about they shoot somebody? We just put them in fucking prison. Sorry for the language. Sorry, forgive me. All right.
Okay.
So,
apology.
So how about we just send them to prison and actually hold them? I cannot tell you how many people I would run. I'd run like, all right, I got some dirtbag committing a crime, get him in custody, run his name. He's on parole for murder. He should be in prison. He shouldn't be out. And that's not a regular thing, but it happens enough that you're like, how do you get parole for murder? Like you literally like killed somebody and they do 2 years and they're out.
They used to hang.
But was it a public service killing though? No. Okay. Then
we're talking. No, man, we're talking like when you talk to him about it, like, oh, I made a mistake. I choked out this person, whatever.
No, you didn't.
Well, look at what happened in New York a couple of weeks ago with those 5 scumbag invaders who roughed up a couple cops, and then Soros-backed DA Alvin Bragg let them go because there wasn't enough evidence.
Let them go 2 hours after they got wrapped up.
Right, and it was all on video. And then they gave 4 of them bus tickets to California, but they arrested them in Arizona. Jeff's probably aware of that.
Well, actually, I think they just come out and said it wasn't them after all.
Oh, really? Okay.
They've been other invaders.
The other invaders, okay, but I'm looking at a news report on my other laptop right now where NYPD and even Kathy Hope, what's his name, the mayor, are so pissed off over that they launched a program last night where they are going after migrants and arresting them for stuff that they've been letting slide all this time. But I saw a different video on it, and there are a shit ton of cops in New York right now patrolling all of the areas where the migrants are and arresting them for things like, apparently a lot of them get into delivery. They buy a scooter or a bicycle and do delivery. It's low barrier to entry. Well, New York, of course, is much like California, has regulations on everything. So any bike or moped that they find that isn't licensed properly, they're impounding them on the spot and they're arresting people as well. It's kind of a glorious thing that should have happened a long time ago. But
this is why when SHTF happens, the cops won't be around because they've been getting treated like crap. Like I can tell you, like when I first started, I had a plan. Like, how am I going to stay around, take care of my family? We were all like, we talked about it. Like, hey, what would you do? Right now, I can tell you when you talk to cops, I just asked that question. I did a law enforcement question this week. I had 170 cops from all over the country. And the first question, I do a conflicted question. And I got a conflicted one that's basically made for law enforcement. You're basically military, police, like whatever. Are you going to stay or are you going to go? And every single person to a T is like, I'm leaving. Why would I stay? They treat me like crap now. Why would I abandon my family? We get what we reap, man.
There is some variance state to state, though. Imagine in New York a couple of weeks ago, if those two cops had have shot the invaders. They'd be up on charges right now. Alvin Bragg would not have released them. They probably would have been charged at the very least with second-degree murder. That's a pretty good indication where things are in New York State, New York City in particular, based on our laws here in Florida. Stand your ground applies to the cops and all the rest of us. They could have shot those guys and it probably wouldn't have even made the 5 o'clock news because I have family that are in law enforcement here in Florida, and there's all kinds of things that are brought to our attention that we're like, when did this happen? We don't even see it in the news. Doesn't even get broadcast.
Guys, we're a little off track of our subject here.
We're way off. We're way off.
Yeah,
topic,
we're way off.
Bring it back.
Let's if I'm the voice of reason, come on, man. The bomb tech is the voice of reason. Things have gotten bad. We've talked about, let's face it, we've talked about what are the kind of causes that we're dealing with here. What are the implications and what are all that? Now we got to go to the how do we deal with this?
First off, you got to make sure that you have a decent food supply, and now is not too late, right? You should have a year's worth of food, right? And if you don't have anything now, you can every time you go to the store, buy a little bit more. And then just start cycling your food, right? Make sure you have food and water enough for a year, but not just you, but like anticipate who else is now going to come to you that you can't turn away, right? Like I got a friend that served in the 820th with me and Mike that I've been friends forever. He's not ready, but I know he's going to show up. I got a year for you, buddy. Right? I'll take care of you. You also should have a little bit for giving away, right? Sure. Have some charity food. Have like 20% of what you have that you can, like, because people are going to show up. And I know a lot of people now are like, oh, just turn them away. They're going to be a problem and you're going to have to deal with that problem. And shooting people is not really the right thing to do. Okay. Unless they deserve it. Right. But you should have, and also it's the good thing to do. Go help them because you're going to want the same thing when it's your time to need help. Right. We'll have that as well. And then you should be okay.
I would recommend that people go and download the LDS preparedness manual.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the Bible of prepping for food, right? So the doctrine is that you should have 2 years worth of food stacked up, but they lay out some very tangible things that you can do to get to that point. It's not like, okay, you start at zero and all of a sudden you have 2 years worth of food, but also the LDS church is really good at looking after their members. So, and they don't embarrass them. They don't publicize it or anything like that. They're pretty kind-hearted people for the most part. I'm not saying I'm Christian, but nonetheless, that manual is truly the Bible for food preparedness. And it's a free download on the internet. Just look up LDS preparedness manual. I think the latest version was published in 2012, if memory serves me right.
Yeah,
so I am surrounded.
They may not necessarily all live by it, but it is a great framework.
A lot of them,
a good portion of them certainly do.
So I live right next to a temple, which there's not many of them, right? I'm pretty much the only non-LDS person in my neighborhood. When I go for a walk with my dog, every garage has a 200-gallon water thing. And like you can see who's prepared, who's not. Very interesting. Yeah. So I feel good in my neighborhood that I won't have to do much charity as far as that goes. Good. I know, though, a lot of them don't have guns, but they're good people. And I know that I actually have charity guns and charity ammo. And it sounds funny, but they're good people. And I know that by arming them, I now have an extra person in my defense. Just something to think about.
I know, absolutely smart. So other things that people can do is you can do what's happening in France and Germany and stand up, because much like Todd Callender, the attorney that we had on recently, said, we have the numbers on our side. At least at this point in time, we still have the numbers on our side. So if you stand up for your rights, you assert your rights, and you push back against this craziness, because the numbers are on our side, we can actually force some change. This is not a hopeless situation, but many people have resigned themselves to the fact that whatever the government decides is so be it. It's going to proceed that way, and it doesn't need to, is really what the point is. We had a discussion around the whole 3% idea, right? In 1776, 3% of the colonists stood up to the king. We ended up with our freedom. If you do the numbers today, 3% is somewhere, call it 10, 12 million people. And if you take the law enforcement, military, and reservists, you have about 2.5 million. And a good portion of those are good guys. There are people. So Joe Biden and these other blowhards who like to spout off that you need an F-15 or an F-16, they know as well as anybody that the numbers are not on their side. And Jeff said his best man his wedding flew an A-10 Warthog. The chances that he's going to Americans,
Not gonna
slim
happen.
to none. It ain't going to happen. So you have to stand up for yourself, and you have to do it in such a way that you don't get thrown in the gulag. And seems to be working for the German and the French farmers. So
I know it's hard to believe, but since 2020, I've been going to protest as a protester, like against the people trying to overthrow our government. Like we're talking like the BLM Antifa people.
Black hoodie and all.
Oh no, the very first one, BLM came to Boise, and I sent an email out to about 1,000 retired cops saying, "Come join me as a counter protest, and like we'll protect the Capitol." 3,000 people showed up.
That's awesome.
And I can tell you right now, if like I never imagined myself ever doing something like that, but you have to stand up to protect your community. If you don't, and just know the laws, just look at what you can do, not do, and then talk to the cops. First thing I did when I showed up is I started talking to the cops. Oh, they don't know who I am. And turns out they're pissed off too. And they're talking about how heartwarming is. And they're not going to turn a blind eye for certain things, but they're happy to see you there and they'll talk to you there. Just know what you can and can't do. But you're absolutely right, man. People like, I never thought I would do that.
Well, the other piece to that is that we've had some stolen elections and they're rigged. If enough people come out against these really crooked politicians, like there is no justification for the handful of rhinos who voted against impeaching Mayorkas. There's zero justification for that. He has completely abdicated his oath and responsibility, and he should be impeached and thrown out. And we've got chicken shit rhinos that are a part of this uniparty, and you got to take a stand against that as well. You have to participate. It could be volunteering at a election location, and if shenanigans go on, make sure you document it, video it, get as much as you possibly can, but also talking to people and say, don't vote for that asshole. He's not for us. He's on the Chinese payroll or something to that effect, whatever they are. Swalwell, for example, Chinese payroll. Dianne Feinstein, Chinese payroll. And the list goes on and on and on. So
everybody from California.
Yeah.
Shocker.
At the end of the day, you have to stand up for your rights.
I'm not a trained intelligence analyst or anything, but I think that qualifies as a trend.
Yes.
So I agree with everything that you guys said. Yes, wonderful thing to fall back on. Start putting pressure on elected officials, starting at the lowest level, working your way up. Right. I've already reached out to my governor based upon what we talked about the other day with the paramilitary thing. And it just so happens that I live near some of these people, but working on that, absolutely 100%. I want to add into there also, though, that you can also live in a more sustainable fashion. So the more that you can detach yourself from that process where you're relying on the farmers quite as much. If you don't have to rely upon them, now you can produce your own food. And that's why I garden. That's why I've got my chickens. That's heck, I'm even looking at rabbits and stuff. And heck, Chris, you saw it last weekend. Jason almost sent me home with ducks.
He did.
You tried to guilt me into taking ducks.
It was actually pretty comical. But let me throw another thing out here that is a good indicator. The bad guys and their plans to control food supply. The Biden admin wants you to register your gardens now. And seriously, this initiative.
Where'd that come from?
I'm shit you not. The FDA wants you to register your garden voluntarily. They want to know who is growing the food. And
put a link at the bottom of this. You got to put a link on this. Make a note.
I'm happy to.
Make a note. I want a link on this.
No problem.
I'll send them a registration. All right.
Yeah, this is going back this has happened 2 years ago, if memory serves me right, where they want you to register your garden. And why would they want you to register your garden? That's a rhetorical question. We all know what the answer is, because we're back to controlling food, and they're going to want to license people. Look at the shit that's been happening with natural food products. So we can let 10 million illegals across the border, many of them known terrorists and criminals, but we will go and arrest Amish farmers because they sold unpasteurized milk. It just happened 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Again.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Come on.
Dead serious. They raided, and they've raided multiple farmers and Amish farmers.
Who made the arrest?
A bunch of assholes.
Was it the feds?
Feds.
Yeah.
No, that's enough said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look,
They're not real. They're not real cops,
right?
to be honest.
Ooh, and it's
Hey,
Keith
hey.
off the top rope with a flying elbow.
So take a
Yeah,
look
point.
at the history in Wisconsin of this happening. This is not something new. This has been going on for a long time as it relates to dairy products. It doesn't matter if it's milk or cheese. It's against the law. Not only that, it's also against the law to ship those products across state lines unless you have the proper licenses to do it, right? So
SDA.
So there is the spirit of the law and the letter of the law.
Right.
And we are taught that at day one in the academy. And yes, the law says this, but use your good judgment when you make your decisions. And somehow the feds have forgotten that. They have forgotten that whole spirit of the law.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Not complicated.
Well, and let's face it. Come on, back to those of us that have been government employees. What's the mantra sitting in a government employee position? Hey, look, we work for the government. We're not that good at our jobs. If we were good at what we do, we'd be working for a private corporation.
Some of us are just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, I used to always tell people that having worked in the government for 26 years, it is guaranteed the least efficient way to deliver a good or service in the world. That's why my thing is the government should only do those things that absolutely must get done, and nobody in the private sector can or will do it. Otherwise, the government shouldn't be doing bupkis because they suck at all of it, and they always end up with the opposite of the intended effect.
So there's a
All right,
gentleman
Chris,
in
reel us
Michigan.
in.
There's a gentleman in Michigan who just delivered a speech that closely mirrors your sentiments, Jeff. And he's also running for office in Michigan. And he's got a couple of videos that have gone viral on X. And his position is it's so bad that he wants everybody, including his entire family who's on board with this, to stop paying taxes immediately, because he's sick and tired of seeing the government waste money to move us backwards instead of forwards. His whole campaign is predicated on taxes need to end, which is a whole other can of worms. But Mike, let's do the conflicted question. Let's get that answered.
Okay. Conflicted question. Back to this. The government has taken over your country, the government has taken over, and your country becomes a police state standing on our necks. All rebels or nonconformists, those wascoey webbles, are being hunted and killed. Because of this, you are hiding in the woods at night and you realize a military drone is patrolling the area. What do you do?
First off, while you're hiding in the forest, you should be pressing the fight and imposing your will upon the enemy. You shouldn't be hiding in the forest. Okay, but I digress. Everybody should have some kind of drone defense. They should be researching how to defend themselves against drones, right? So one of the best things I ever saw was a carjacker running from us who hid under a children's kiddie pool because the FLIR from the helicopter couldn't spot him. And I was like, damn, you're smart. I was like looking around. We lost him in the backyard. I'm like, dang, where'd this guy go? And I was like, wait, what hides the FLIR? That kiddie pool? No way. Take it over. There he is. Hiding right under there, right? So what you want to do is like some of the things you want to look for, like with drones, some have forward-looking infrared, some don't, right? So you want to think, obviously, like before you hide, like stop hiding in the woods, go impose your will and go attack the enemy. But if you find yourself in that position, look at what's working in Ukraine and what's not working in Ukraine, because they're using drones like crazy. Camouflage, using terrain to hide yourself, right? That's what works. A lot of people want to go kinetic, but they don't realize how hard it is, meaning shooting, like how hard it is to shoot a drone out of the air. They're like, oh, I'm just going to shoot with my 5.56. It ain't going to work that way, man.
They're using goose guns.
Yeah.
They're using a lot of goose guns.
I'd say 12 gauge number 4.
Or 10 gauge. You got, so look at camouflage. Look at like what works really good against thermal is thermal blanket, like thermal blankets, like a space blanket, right? But it's shiny too, right? But there's other options. Just start thinking things like that. But you shouldn't be in that position. You seriously screwed up in your preparedness. Just saying. All right. Next.
On that note, I've got some camo back here from a company in Germany. It's called Confusion Camo, and it's really popular amongst law enforcement and military in Europe. The one that they sent me absorbs infrared. So we've done some testing. We did a video probably a year and a half ago where Cindy went with me, and we went to an abandoned golf course and went to see how far away we could get, and the thermal could not, or sorry, the IR could not pick me up in that at all. It just looked like any other stuff in the bushes.
It is easier than you think to hide from thermal. If you think about it, if you think ahead. And I've seen the lowliest criminal coming out of the ghetto doing really well hiding from floor.
Infrared, there's lots of camos out there that will absorb the infrared and don't send a reflection back. You can hide with that. And then on the thermal side, the easiest way to do it, and we did this here in Florida, we have palmettos everywhere. They're like weeds, and they're brutal. But if you go stand behind one of them, the thermal's not going to pick you up. It's not going to see through thick brush like that. Anyway, I would second your recommendation though to have decent camouflage if you're in that type of situation. But Mike, I'm going to pass off to you for a minute while I still mull over what else we can do to combat this thing.
Going back to the one, you shouldn't find yourself in that situation in the first place, because Mao says that the gorilla is the fish swimming among the water of the populace. It's a great place to be able to blend in. However, in a situation like that, you also have to look at, now they've got all the facial identification cameras and all that kind of crazy stuff. Blending in where you can blend in is a thing. But I'm wearing my Tacticloak that JJ did the review on not too long ago. I've got one of those. I love it. It is a great multi-use item. I can use it for survival purposes, and it will completely hide me from thermal identification. So, whoop.
So what you're just going to hide from the drone? You're not going to take any action against it?
No.
Oh, it's going to be really tough to do that. While you're fighting it, it's reporting back where you are.
Right. Especially if it's an ISR drone. Man, you're like, if you're looking at an ISR pred, that thing's up at 10,000 feet. What am I going to do to that? If they're smart, even if it's a shadow drone, that thing's up to 5,000 feet. I'm still not going to do anything to that.
Well, even a DJI drone, and you put that thing up at 500 feet, how you can hit a DJI drone at 500 feet? You're not going to do that. Your shotgun's not going to reach that. Your 5.56, you can't even see it. Yeah, you're using a scope, but have you ever really used a scope to shoot a moving target that small in the air?
Right.
You may not even know that that's there.
What you need to do is just go hide and be prepared for the ground troops that are coming to come get you.
Yeah.
And be prepared to ambush them when they come in.
And that's the problem. That ISR bird is there. That ISR bird is there forever. You just,
they ain't gonna go away.
Trying to shake. I have watched a lot of bad guys try and shake ISR birds.
Ain't gonna happen.
You're in a world of hurt. You need to get amongst a whole bunch of other people and get into buildings and stuff. Like you need to not be there. You need the water around you.
In this instant where you're out in the woods,
you need to be a needle in a haystack, and if you're a needle, the haystack are other people.
Right.
That's a good way of putting it. All right, guys. Well, rambling conversation today. I think we solved somewhere around 92% of the world's problems in this episode. So quick pat on the back for everybody today. And that's it. So we shall reconvene with another episode of Survival Dispatch News next week. Until then, everybody stay safe and stay frosty. This video is sponsored by William Tell Archery Supplies, home of the Mini Striker crossbow. Click the link in the description below to learn more.